Dámy a pánové.
Ladies and gentlemen, very good late afternoon to all of you, and I would like to welcome you once again at the first day of the International Scientific Conference organized by the Ministry of Agriculture of the Czech Republic on the occasion of the Czech presidency in the Council of EU. Let me welcome you at the conference titled European Agri-Food Sustainability and Innovation. Nevertheless, the name of the present session is Safety and Sustainable Agri-Food Sector. We have found a badge of Mr. Arno Decker. So, Arno Decker, please be so kind. If you have lost it and you would like to come tomorrow, so you should have this entrance card. Let us start. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to say a few words about our next speaker, Dr. Ursula Vincent, who is an analytical chemist, biochemist, and biologist. She is a senior scientist at the European Commission with more than 25 years of experience, particularly in the development and validation of analytical methods. Ursula Vincent is currently head of the Food and Feed Compliance Unit at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, and she's also director of 3 host reference laboratories of the EU. For instance, one of them being the GM Food and Feed Laboratory. Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Ursula Vincent from the European Commission is going to speak about the detection of plant products developed by the targeted mutagenesis techniques.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much as well to the organizers for having invited me here. Basically, in the next 20 minutes, something like this, I will try to speak to you about the, let's say, the analytical approaches. We heard a lot already on NGTs this morning, but let's look now from our point of view in the URL. But first of all, like you said, I'm working at the European Commission, and more specifically at the Joint Research Center, which is a direction general of the European Commission, which is dealing with science. What we do as main, let's say, a target or main purpose is to provide scientific advice to the Commission throughout the whole policy cycle. And close to this, as you said before in the introduction, one of our, let's say, topic of interest and one of our main activities is with the European Union Reference Laboratory for genetically modified food and feed, and from now on I will call it EURL, it's much easier, GMFF. If I can, yes. Let's start with GMO analysis. What is the GMO analysis for us? How we define it, how we organize it. Basically, to do GMO analysis, you need validated detection methods, you need certified reference materials, and you need official controls. Or at least it consists as well in official controls, because basically we are validating the methods in order to provide to the society, to the laboratories, the tools to perform these official controls. So if we go first on the validated detection method, basically, an applicant, how does it work? An applicant, when he wants to submit a GMO for authorization, because a GMO needs to be authorized in Europe, he needs as well to submit a detection method, and this he does to the URL GMFF, to us. When we receive this method, what we do is we validate the method in what we call a stepwise workflow. There are several steps. I will not enter into details in each of them, of course, but what we do at the end is really to assess the method's performance And then we include these methods in the so-called GMOs method database that is then available for everybody. And we are not working alone. We heard a lot this morning about multidisciplinarity. There is one word that I would like to add in this context is networking, collaboration. Because nowadays, I think this is one of the key strengths, is to collaborate. And we do collaborate, we coordinate, and we organize the European network of laboratories that are detecting GMOs in Europe. They are coming not from the European Commission, they are coming from all member states, and we are working together with those experts in the field on the different topics of interest for the GMOs. We have more than 200 methods at the moment that are registered in the database. And as I said before, in here you have the web address. These methods are publicly available, and then they can be consulted and taken up by the people interested in. What we also do, and once more, I will certainly not go in each of the boxes over there, but in here, on this website, which is our website, you can see all what we do. Besides the method database, we are organizing comparability testing, because this is one of the things that is of extreme importance in several domains in the food sectors, but also in other sectors, but in particular also for the GMO analysis. So we need to make sure that when you measure and you detect and you quantify in the context where we were, if you measure in France, that at least your results are comparable to the one that you will obtain in Germany, in the Czech Republic, in Belgium, or wherever else. So each year we are organizing proficiency testing on certain aspects, and we do that with, like I said before, in collaboration with the European network of GMO laboratories, but also with national reference laboratories that we have. And you see on these slides that we are also producing guidance documents to help the different laboratories. We do trainings, we do workshops, and many other activities. Certified reference materials. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but this is a key pillar when you talk about validation. Because to validate, you need to have an anchor. You need to have a reference. And this is what we need. We have certified reference materials because this helps you to calibrate, to have a reference, to make sure that what you have can be linked to something. And one important aspect is that for each GMO application, the applicant needs to have a certified reference material. And you have two producers in the world of the certified reference materials. You have us, the Joint Research Center in Belgium, and you have the American Oil Chemists Society. I'm not citing it just to say we are the one producing. Just keep the information for a little bit later when we happen to talk about the NGTs. And finally, the European Food and Feed Control System. You all know this regulation. It is going with its article on several aspects of the food safety and so on. You have here the GMOs. You have other articles that are of less interest for today's speech, but that are as well in the regulation. And now, some of you might wonder, why do we need this regulation? What is the prime aim of this regulation? Then basically, and I heard also about it this morning, believe it or not, but the regulation is made primarily to inform and to give the choice to the consumer of buying safe GMO-containing products or not. The regulation is not there to tell you to do it or not. The regulation is there to give the choice, to inform. And therefore, to identify the presence of GMOs, which may potentially pose a safety risk for the consumer or the environment. The GMO analytical workflow. First of all, what we do. We have to do first a qualitative detection of the plant species present in the sample. Then the qualitative detection of the presence of GMOs. For this, we are using screening markers. Then the qualitative detection of authorized GMOs, and finally, a quantification of the GMO content. This is, in one nutshell, the steps that we follow for this analysis. What about the GMO control analysis in the EU? Like I said before, we are not performing the control ourselves. We are providing the tools. The control is performed by the official control laboratories and the national reference laboratories of the different member states. You have 37 national reference laboratories for official control of GMO. In fact, every year, you have more than 30,000 samples that are analyzed for GMOs, including food, feed, seed plants, etc. In general, you have twice as much food samples that are analyzed compared to feed samples. And what do we have with this? Basically, most of the food samples that are tested are negative for GMOs. For feed samples, in many of them, there are GMOs that are found, but they are correctly labeled. And sometimes, occasionally, you also have unauthorized GMOs that are detected. But what do we do with all this information? The main conclusion is to say that the system is working. You find what you need to find. So the system is in place and seems to be efficient. Now the main question is it still efficient if we would have to analyze NGTs? Because we are talking about NGTs, which are potentially the next GMOs to be tested. So here you have the recall of the three pillars that I spoke about before. What did we do with this? First of all, we did the scientific literature review, basically because we needed to know how is the situation in the community, in the scientific community. What is the state of the art of the technological developments in NGTs? So in here, as you can see, you have a dynamic and evolving, it's a dynamic and evolving field, many techniques, many variants, different types, and so on. What we did as well is a market application reviews. We saw, or we were trying to see, or to estimate, what is the amplitude, of products derived from NGTs that are, or that will be in the near future on the market. And there you can see we have issued 2 reports about this. If you are interested, the reports are also, we are a public, let's say, organization. The reports are also available if you would need to consult them. Huh? We heard about NGTs this morning, so I will not stay too long on this, but basically just for recall, what is an NGT? NGT creates mutation in the genetic material, for example, in the DNA. So in here you would have what we call conventional, what is called, not we, conventional breeding. So here you have the target gene. In conventional breeding, you have random mutations that are occurring. In the classical mutagenesis, so you would target one gene, but then you see that you have quite some random mutations occurring as well. For NGTs, you have a target mutagenesis on the gene of interest, but you also have random mutations, even if they are much less than in the classical mutagenesis. Validation of NGT products. If I come back on the structure that I was telling you for the GMO analysis before, what did we do to get prepared in case that we need to? We started to work already. And again, with the ENGL, so the European network of the laboratories analyzing GMOs in Europe, what we did is already to have an addendum to one of our important, the key guidance document that is valid for the validation according to the current legislation. So an addendum to the minimum performance requirement guidance. And then we have a remaining question, which I think is the key one. So basically, what does happen when, in fact, you have mutations that already occur in nature? You need detection methods. The detection methods rely on DNA sequence recognition. Basically, in here and there, I will, I think, better add my glasses to read properly. If the sequences are identical, because this is an important point, you don't have a method for the moment that is able to differentiate two products made by different means. If you have the same mutation arriving by a conventional mean or the new technique, for the moment we are not able to detect it. Additionally, the shorter the sequence difference between the two sequences, the more difficult it will be to discriminate them by any method. And this is what is shown now at the moment in the literature, in the state of the art of what we know. So the method needs not only to detect, to add a level more, but they would also need to quantify the GMO and GT products. And then we have, because some people will tell me, you have some description in the literature, but basically the specificity will also depend on the sequence around the mutation as well. The robustness and the transferability of such methods to other laboratories needs also to be demonstrated. Remember what I said, you need to make sure that if you have a result in one laboratory, you can have a comparable one in another lab if you want to have a sound conclusion. And then basically we have complex matrices that are the food and feed samples. So basically, what you have is that, would it be that the mutated sequence derived from NGT or from conventional breeding, are you still able to detect it? The answer is, like I said before, no. You still have uncertainty, and then we don't have a court-proof evidence for that. The screening is not possible because there are no common markers. Then only event-specific detection methods are to be applied. So testing will only detect the NGT products with known unique sequences and with a validated detection method. Moreover, if one NGT contains, and it may contain more than one mutation, then there is a need to analyze. For analyzing, you will need more than one detection method. So little by little, I hope that I'm succeeding to pass on to you the complexity of the topic in the terms of the regulation and in the terms of detection. So then basically, for enforcement, this has a significant impact. And finally, to make it even more complex, there is no alternative high-throughput methods that can be applied in routine analysis. Coming back on the certified reference materials, which was the second pillar, I think that you remember that I told you that we only have 2 producers in the world. Now, if we have a lot of NGTs coming on the market, are these 2 producers ready, equipped to face a big, let's say, increase of needs for production of certified reference materials? So, as a conclusion, what I can tell you today is that basically analytical methods for the detection of NGT plant products can be developed, but perhaps not in all cases. Demonstrating the specificity of such methods remains the major problem and is up for court disputes when applied for enforcement. GMO analysis in official control laboratories may be compromised by the significantly increased number of event-specific tests per sample for NGT products. Unknown NGT products, for example, entering the market through imports, cannot be detected in routine analysis. Of course, I'm not doing all this work on my own, so actually I'm not doing the work myself. Here, I couldn't finish the presentation without acknowledging the work of the team of the URL GMFF. I have 2 colleagues here as well. if you need to exchange during the time that we have afterwards for dinner or tomorrow. And with this, I would like to thank you very much for your attention. And I don't know if you have questions, comments, suggestions, either now or afterwards. I'm still here until the end of the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mrs. Vincent, you can stay with us. Yes. Dámy a pánové, já děkuji paní doktorce Ursule Vincent.
I wish to thank Madame Ursula Vincent for her contribution. She's staying with us since at the end of this session we will have Q&A. So I believe our guests are ready and willing to take them answers, so therefore she'll stay here on the stage. Now I'd like to ask actually Now I'd like to ask Director General of CropLife Europe, Mr. Olivier de Matos, to join us here. His presentation is called Leading the Transition Towards a Resilient and Sustainable Agriculture. Perhaps in a nutshell I should introduce him. So, prior to CropLife Europe, he was a Secretary General at ACETOC, European Centre for Exotoxicology and Toxicology of Chemicals, where he spent 4 years leading the association and promoting its scientific program activities and initiatives. And for more than 15 years, he has spent as in the leadership position at Burson Marsteller, now BCW. So, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. And I would like to start by thanking you for the invitation, the organizers for the invitation. We've heard a lot of interventions today. There were a lot of food for thought. And I'm going to echo actually a few things that were said already this morning. I would like to take a few minutes to talk about the work that we do at CropLife Europe and our contribution to the transition towards the transformation to resilient and sustainable agriculture. As CropLife, we have a very important role to play, I believe, and actually we have a leading role to play. We are well positioned to help drive the European agri-food industry transition. We are an association representing a host of technologies all under one roof. We have digital and precision farming, plant biotech innovation, and biopesticides alongside conventional pesticides. And we represent the integrated solutions that are needed to achieve the transition that is required. We can actually respond with these solutions rapidly to changing demands from society and the evolving policy frameworks. And at the very heart of our mission to transform European agriculture is an essential ingredient: innovation. Farming innovation will be essential to achieve and to deliver the EU Farm to Fork and the flagship, the Green Deal. And also, more broadly, to deliver the sustainable and resilient agriculture. I would like to digress a bit and tell you a short story, a story about my grandfather, to illustrate actually the power of innovation. My grandpa was not a farmer. He was someone that was working with his hands. And he was actually doing a lot of things from a very specific raw material. He was a carpenter. And when I was a kid, he was teaching me, he taught me how to use the tools that he actually built himself. And he gave me the love of working wood, so doing beautiful things. And next to him, I learned that doing beautiful things was sometimes painful. It required a lot of time. And it was, at the end of the day, very satisfactory. And it's very similar actually to what farmers are doing. They have tools, and they are doing something that is very useful, and actually they feel very accomplished with it at the end of the day. When my grandpa passed away, he gave me his toolbox is very old toolbox, wooden toolbox, with all these tools. And looking at this toolbox and looking at the one I actually had built up with time, I realized that there were a lot of new things that I had bought and that were enabled me to do things quicker, to also use less material, but with the same result, with the same satisfaction. And that just shows that at some point, the outcome is the same, but the evolution and innovation is needed if we want to get to something and if we want to achieve something. The toolbox that he had is actually the same toolbox that the farmers had at that time, and that's the evolution of the toolbox that the farmers have today. The tools are available for the farmers to use are more sophisticated, they are more efficient, and they are more targeted than they were a few years ago. And in addition to the chemists, to the biologists, and some of the most influential change makers in agriculture, we have computer programmers, and we have electronic engineers. And this is who we are today. We, the members of CropLife, represent a big part of the world crops protection technologies. It is our scientists and our agronomists, our technology experts, and of course farmers themselves who will provide the solutions to make European farming systems more resilient and sustainable. Agriculture innovations may not generate quite much media buzz as other technologies, such as new cars, the latest smartphones, or other new things that are very fancy in the new magazines. Biopesticides are new microbes, big data chemistry, sensors, Internet of Things, new digital farming apps. These are the innovations actually that will make the difference for the future. All these innovations can and will drive the transformation of the European farming. But these innovations do not just pop like that. So to create the transformation it seeks, the European Union must support the ongoing innovation in the agricultural sector and quick access to it. The pests and the diseases do not wait, and farmers need to deal with them right now. What we are asking the EU is to help us deliver on our promise through the creation of a legislative environment that unlocks innovation and allows quick access to it. The EU needs to allow farmers rapid access to a variety of crop protection solutions that help them improve the quality, the market access, and the tradability of their produce. We are playing our part as an industry. We are investing to enable this transition. We already have put billions of euros into developing cutting-edge solutions for Europe's farmers. In 2019, we welcome the European Commission's Green Deal, and in support of the objectives, we have launched the 2030 commitments. We pledge to contribute to and align with the ambitions of the EU Green Deal. The 6 commitments, which are ambitious ones, were adopted in 2020, and they are guiding the sector in 3 key areas: agriculture innovative technologies, circular economy, and better protection of people and the environment. In just 1 year, I'm very proud to say that we made measurable progress in all 6 commitments. I'm going to mention a few, but I invite you to go to our website for more information. The first example I'd like to mention is that we've reached 11% of our target of training 1 million farmers by 2030, and this despite the pandemic. The industry also collection rate for all plastics packaging is now 66%, which represents an increase of 1% since 2020. 1% may sound small, but for Europe it's big. 83% of plastic containers collected in 20 member states were sent for safe and controlled recycling. And lastly, we'll be sharing information next week on our innovation commitment to invest 10 billion euros into precision and digital technologies and 4 billion euros into innovation in biopesticides. While they are not the direct one-to-one replacement for all conventional products, biopesticides are an integral part of the farmer's toolbox. And we talked about it a lot today. The NGTs are also part of the mix. The new digital and precision agriculture technologies will also enable farmers to produce more sustainably. Such technique will reduce pesticide use by between 20 and 30%. We all agree that the transformation to a resilient and sustainable agricultural system in Europe is vital. And if we want to meet food needs today without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs to go tomorrow, we need to act quickly. We've heard, and we will hear more today, about the transition to the future, the many opportunities and challenges around developing sustainable and integrated solutions for crop protection. In a transition of this magnitude, and as Commissioner Kyriakides and Director Earle said, we will need to work closely together with actors all the way up and down the value chain, and with policy and decision makers to manage the transition. This conference is a great example and a great opportunity, especially in the short time scale that is required. Dirk mentioned that we have 7 harvesting until 2030, and that's very short. We will be successful thanks to a collective effort and a collaborative mindset, public and private. Only together we can achieve the transition towards a more resilient and sustainable agriculture that considers all available options and solutions to support farmers. And we are part of the solution. Thank you very much.
Stay with us and sit next to Mrs. Vincent. Dámy a pánové, já ještě...
Ladies and gentlemen, let me thank once again to Mr. de Matos. He will stay with us. He will be available for some of your questions as well. Let me thank for his quite an interesting contribution, was also containing also the story of his life. And now we will have another speaker, Ms. Sabina Neumann from the Foreign Agricultural Service of the USDA. So she works at the United States Department of Agriculture, Foreign Agriculture Service. She focuses on addressing sudden challenges and long-term trade barriers that affect crop and agricultural food exports to the EU in the context of food safety and sustainability. Sabina Neumann has more than 25 years of experience in private and public sectors in trade policy, trade remedies, and advocacy. She also served for a number of years as advisor to the chairman at the U.S. International Trade Commission, where she focused on specialty crops. And it was Sabina Neumann who developed a paper on global economic impacts in relation to the lack of pesticide residue limits. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Sabina Neumann. Takže poprosím o slajdy.
Sabina Neumann, and I am the Senior Trade Advisor for the Plant Division of the Foreign Agricultural Service located in Washington, D.C. As noted, my main focus is on facilitating trade, and particularly focusing on U.S. exports of crops and crop products to the European Union. I want to thank the Czech Ministry of Agriculture for inviting me to speak today about some of the common problems facing farmers here and in the United States. This afternoon, I'll begin by touching on some of the shared challenges and objectives that we have in common. I'll outline also some of the domestic and international initiatives that the USDA is launching to address the need for sustainable and resilient agricultural sectors. In the face of climate change and the growing need to increase productivity, we believe that the way to feed the global community is to invest in the future. And that includes new technologies, resilient plant varieties, and the need to increase and make available pesticides that can be used safely. Since farmers in the United States and around the world are adjusting agronomic practices in response to evolving pesticide policies and MRL levels, I'll also address some of the challenges and impacts of pesticide policies and MRLs and conclude by highlighting some of U.S. crop protection policies and practices that I think you may find illustrative and helpful. First, shared challenges. This morning we heard from a lot of speakers, and I think it's clear that both in Europe and for the United States, we are united in recognizing that there are clear challenges, clear, broad, global challenges to agriculture, and that our agricultural systems really are under pressure and will continue to be under pressure in the future. We need to produce enough food and feed to meet the demands of a growing global population. According to the UN, the global population will increase to 8.6 billion by 2030. And over 3 billion people today cannot afford a healthy diet. So, sustainably increasing agricultural productivity is essential to meeting the needs of both this current and growing global population. It's fundamental to food and nutrition security, and it's a daily worry for the billions of people around the world whose budgets are already stretched thin by high food prices. And even as we need to increase food production, the climate change and climatic conditions resulting from that are disrupting food systems and exacerbating food insecurity. Farmers are dealing with pest pressures arising from these shifts in climatic conditions, but they're also facing new and changing pest pressures resulting from pesticide resistance, as well as needing to battle invasive species. Providing farmers and ensuring that farmers continue to have a comprehensive array of crop protection tools and innovative approaches can increase agricultural productivity, increase incomes, and improve affordability and food security. Against this backdrop, we believe that trade plays a fundamental role. Open markets to trade improve access to diverse foods for healthy diets. They also facilitate the movement of food from areas of high surplus to deficit. But trade is also a critical tool for enhancing food security. Diversified food supplies particularly allow for quick adaptation when market disruptions occur, as we recently saw with COVID and the war in Ukraine. So, this morning we heard a lot about shared challenges, but I think we also have a lot of shared objectives. We recognize that there is neither a single nor simple solution to these very complicated challenges. But without a doubt, I think we agree that this global situation underscores the need for agricultural systems that can be flexible enough to respond to a variety of future shocks, including pandemics, conflicts, changing weather conditions, and of course, pests and disease pressures. We also recognize that we need to produce more with less while minimizing environmental impacts and, of course, protecting consumer safety. I think it's safe to say that both the European Union and the United States also share a fundamental belief in the importance of robust and strong and thorough regulatory systems, because as some of the speakers noted earlier, consumer confidence in food safety is key, and these regulatory systems ensure that. In the United States, sustainability is not a new issue or a new concept. It is a historical cornerstone of U.S. agriculture. Since the Dust Bowl of the 1930s, the U.S. government has stepped in to create soil conservation programs and sought new ways to balance agricultural productivity and environmental stewardship. For more than 80 years, U.S. government agencies have stepped in to create soil conservation programs and seek new ways to help clean and conserve water, boost soil quality, restore habitat, and also make sure that our rural economies are resilient and profitable. USDA is tapping into existing programs and launching new efforts to support a vision for climate-smart agriculture that is farmer-focused, market-oriented, and trade facilitating. Our efforts are focused on science-based, data-driven decision-making. We believe there's a strong and growing interest in food that is grown in a climate-friendly way, and that by leveraging innovation and science, we provide our farmers with the tools they need to ensure productivity. We also believe that pesticides and integrated pest management systems, as well as agricultural, biotechnology, conventional breeding, and other tools will help secure our international global agricultural future. The U.S. is investing in research and innovation through our domestic programming and also leveraging partnerships with research agencies around the world. At the international level, the U.S. has signed on to several initiatives to address food security. This includes Aim for Climate and Sustainable Productivity Growth Coalition. Aim for Climate is a voluntary global initiative launched by the United States and the United Arab Emirates. Its goal is to significantly increase investment and support for climate-smart agriculture over the next 5 years. In addition, the United States and more than 100 partners are working through the Sustainability Productivity Growth Coalition to accelerate the transition to more sustainable food systems. And this is a platform to exchange information, learn from each other about best practices, and work towards sustainable productivity growth around the world. Finally, the Partnerships for Climate-Smart Commodities is the centerpiece of our strategy to position agriculture as the leader in delivering climate-based solutions through a voluntary, incentive-based, and market-driven approach. When USDA launched the Partnerships program earlier, we committed $1 billion in support. But having the tremendous amount of interest from agricultural stakeholders in the United States, we have tripled that commitment to more than $3 billion this year. For the first round of funding, USDA received more than 450 proposals from farmers, farm groups, environmental groups, energy groups, businesses, local governments of all shapes, and businesses of all shapes and sizes. Those initial awards supported projects in all 50 states and support climate-smart production practices on more than 25 million acres of working land. So as I mentioned before, agricultural production and trade are particularly important in the context of growing populations and global food insecurity around the world. Having access to a robust and flexible crop protection system enables farmers to provide more food and more for more people. So put simply, while we recognize the need for sustainable agriculture, we also recognize that growing conditions and pest pressures vary by region and by country, and that there is no one-size-fits-all solution to managing local pest and disease pressures. USDA works actively to promote IPM systems that favor preventing and avoiding pests by using a combination of cultural, physical, biological, and chemical pesticide controls. We believe that the judicious use of pesticides is a key part of integrated pest management systems that allow for sustainable food production while also promoting conservation and smart farming practices. So trade moves food around the world, and those food products have to comply with pesticide MRLs. Which brings me to kind of the area that I enjoy talking about the most, pesticide MRLs. Because MRLs are meant to be trade facilitating, and when they work well, they really work well. They enable officials to make sure that pesticides are applied appropriately and in accordance to the directions on the label. However, the global landscape for MRLs has become increasingly fragmented, and there are many challenges to meeting food needs in this landscape of fragmented MRLs. Those include differences in regulatory environments and different approaches to both pesticide registration and review policies, as well as pesticide MRL limits themselves. We believe that, that regulatory decisions should be based on sound evidence, science, and complete risk assessments. And that's in large part because differences in risk assessment processes between markets can significantly impact the number of pesticides available for farmers to use, as well as the MRLs. In addition, in terms of codex, we recognize that there's a limit on the number of codex MRLs that the body can issue based on capacity constraints at codex, and that's another challenge to global trade. In addition, especially when maximum residue levels are especially low in export markets, the inability to be able to secure an import tolerance can also affect trade flows. And the challenge with MRLs in terms of how they affect production and trade is that typically the lowest export market MRL is the one that most growers, especially exporting growers, have to meet, regardless of what domestic MRL levels are and regardless of what domestic pest pressures and disease pressures warrant. And that becomes problematic because when MRLs vary across markets, what we've seen is that farmers are typically faced with a choice, and that choice is either to try and segregate their crops, which is either very costly, or for products that need to be bulked or blended, sometimes impossible, or to grow to the lowest MRL to avoid losing market access. And that, unfortunately, not only increases cost, but can have negative effects on yield and product quality. So to comply with changing MRLs, growers have to either change pesticide use or they have to change pesticide use patterns. And that's problematic because it assumes a couple of things. It assumes that alternative pesticides are available, or it assumes that alternative production practices are immediately available. They're equally effective and affordable. And those things are unfortunately not always true. When MRLs for pesticides that are close substitutes for one another are lost, then finding alternatives is even more difficult, and that typically is most problematic for growers of specialty or minor crops. Losing access to pesticides also can disrupt these very carefully designed IPM systems that can often take decades to develop. And the lack of alternative products that can be used in rotation with one another also has negative impacts on pesticide resistance. So what we see is farmers that are faced with rising input costs and increased cost of compliance while facing many and growing challenges to control pest and disease pressures. So while MRLs are meant to facilitate trade in safe foods, oftentimes what we see now is that MRLs can have very unintended consequences on both trade and food production, as well as food security. Since losing access to crop protection tools can decrease yields, affect product quality, and increase food loss. So this brings me to some U.S. practices for U.S. crop protection. And by crop protection here, I really mean pesticides. So again, I'm with the Foreign Agricultural Service at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And what I do within FAS is help lead some of the USDA's international work on trade and plants and pesticide issues. I work very closely with my colleagues in USDA in the Office of Pesticide Management Policy, which I'm going to refer to as OPMP, the USDA's Pesticide Data Program, PDP, as well as the U.S. Codex Office. And then we also regularly engage with our counterparts at separate federal agencies, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. So I'm going to start with OPMP. My colleagues at the Office of Pest Management Policy are the USDA lead who interact very regularly with EPA and lead USDA efforts on pesticide registration and renewal policies. One thing that is very special and unique about the work that my colleagues at OPMP do, and I think it's very interesting for the European Union and for folks here, is that OPMP works very actively to engage with our domestic growers and farmers. And they play this unique role in ensuring that farmers' voices and needs are represented in regulatory decisions. I liked Olivier's reference to his grandfather because one thing we know is that today's farmers are not like our grandfathers. They have access to much more data, much more technology, the ability to use precision farming. And what OPMP does by regularly engaging with stakeholders is to kind of move beyond the bureaucratic office where we sit alone behind computers and desks and get on the ground information from farmers who are actually growing these products. And that enables OPMP to inform EPA and give them the most accurate data possible to help ensure that pesticide regulatory decisions that are made in the United States are also based on realistic agricultural practices. As part of that, OPMP also responds to proposed pesticide risk mitigation strategies. In addition, OPMP, as I mentioned, we focus a lot on integrated pest management, and OPMP, it provides federal leadership on IPM strategies in the United States and includes the development and adoption, promoting the adoption of the National Roadmap for IPM, coordinating with other federal agencies, and 4 USDA-funded regional IPM centers that basically divide the United States into 4 different regions and help promote not only IPM efforts, but also technology transfers from region to region and then federally across the United States. As I mentioned, we also work with AMS Pesticide Data Program, PDP. PDP is a national U.S. pesticide residue monitoring program. It provides the most comprehensive pesticide residue database in the United States, which is also publicly available. PDP activities include sampling, testing, and reporting on pesticide residues in the United States and focuses on commodities particularly consumed by infants and children. Through its annual sampling program, PDP has collected thousands of samples, and EPA relies on these PDP samples to conduct dietary risk assessments and also to ensure that the pesticide residues found in foods in the United States remain at safe levels. So on that point, PDP also provides annual reports, also publicly available, and they consistently show that over 99% of sampled products had residues below EPA tolerance or MRL levels and pose no safety concerns. We also work with our colleagues at the U.S. Codex Office, which is housed in USDA, and help support their work with scientists and experts across the United States and around the world to support and facilitate an increased number of food safety standards like the Codex MRLs I mentioned earlier. Moving outside the USDA, we work very closely with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and FDA. EPA, for those that don't know, is the U.S. agency that is responsible in the United States for federal pesticide regulations. So EPA approves pesticide registrations and then periodically every 15 years also reviews those pesticide registrations. And EPA also approves the pesticide labels with use directions as well as restrictions that are intended to reduce risk. EPA is also responsible for setting tolerances, which is how we refer to MRLs in the United States. And then a different agency, the Food and Drug Administration, is responsible for enforcing those MRLs, both inside the United States and at the border. Briefly, I want to touch on 2 important pieces of U.S. legislation that I think are also somewhat interesting and special. So under FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, that is the piece of legislation under which EPA is responsible for registering pesticides before they can be sold or distributed for use in the United States. A separate piece of legislation, the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act, gives EPA the authority to set tolerances. And the reason I raise these 2 pieces of legislation is because they have slightly different regulatory standards. Under FIFRA, EPA is required to consider both risks and benefits in terms of registering pesticides. Under FFDCA, the standard is to only consider safety. There is no risk-benefit analysis where the EPA sets MRLs or tolerances when there's a reasonable certainty of no harm to consumers. One other thing, kind of outside this regulatory framework that, given the interest in biopesticides, I thought I'd also mention is that since 1994, EPA has also established an office to promote the use of biopesticides, which we recognize as an important part of our IPM systems. EPA does the same rigorous review process when registering biopesticides, but because this is something that we really support and want to promote the use of, EPA does require less data, and what that means in practice is instead of the several-year process that it takes to register conventional chemical products, there is a faster process for biopesticides, which typically take only a year for EPA to complete the review process of. So that's kind of another interesting aspect of some of the U.S. ways to facilitate different tools for farmers to use. USDA is strongly supportive of all of this EPA work. And I just want to point out some of the strengths that we see in this U.S. regulatory framework on pesticides. First is that it's grounded on science and based on full risk assessments. Second, and again, I think this is something that's interesting and special, is that there is a strong recognition and consideration of benefits. Like I mentioned, under FIFRA, risk management decisions have to consider the benefits of pesticides to the user when EPA is making pesticide registration decisions. And finally, there are provisions for transparency and public participation in every step of EPA's decision-making. For example, EPA's process of registering pesticides or renewing pesticides does not happen as a closed-door process between EPA and pesticide manufacturers. There are frequent and ample notices that we announce in the U.S. Federal Register that allow intermittent, or I should say periodic public comments to be submitted to the EPA regularly throughout these processes. And those comments are reviewed in their entirety by EPA and taken very seriously. So I can vouch that EPA not only takes the best science and data into account, but it also places a high value in this transparency of its decision-making process and on the input that the public provides and others can provide, including environmental groups, on studies and data that they have available to them. We believe that this system has provided U.S. growers with one of the most robust and full pest management toolboxes in the world. And although we would always like to see that toolbox be bigger and fuller, in general, we believe that our regulatory system has really allowed for the effective use of pesticides and is representative of a diverse interest of the American public. I'm kind of running out of time, so I'm going to move quickly and I guess move to my conclusion, which is that the U.S. shares a common interest with Europe and with the world in terms of addressing sustainability, climate change, food security, and food safety. We believe, though, that ensuring farmers' prosperity is the key to sustainability overall, because farming conditions, as I said, can vary by location and scale, and that really means that a diverse toolkit with a variety of innovative technologies and techniques is needed. Science-based decision-making, we believe, also supports not only productivity, but also innovation and conservation. So we look forward to continuing to build resilient agricultural systems that can tackle the challenges that we've heard so much about today, while still avoiding unintended consequences on food production and trade. So with that, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mrs. Neumann, for your speech. Dámy a pánové, dovolte mi, abych sem
Ladies and gentlemen, now if you have nothing against that, I wish to ask Mr. Doležal, Institute of Experimental Botany of the Czech Academy of Sciences, to join us here, because his presentation has a lot to do with what we have just heard. And now you have the unique opportunity to pose questions to the speakers about anything of your interest. Of course, we have a mic. You have to wait for the mic, otherwise we wouldn't hear and wouldn't be able to interpret. Now, the lady is approaching you with a mic. I'm gonna speak in the Czech language. Could you... well, I don't know, someone from Opana. Yeah. They have to speak on the mic. I wish to thank Madam Sabina Neumann, because this, for me, was, it was like something from a different world. This is a brief comment, and that will be followed by the question. In the Green Deal system, there is one serious shortcoming or hitch, which she had talked about with respect to the US. We share things in a similar way, but she talked and she referred to a farmer many times, while in our system, and this was heard in the course of all the presentations from the Brussels and from the Czech Republic, namely that all the crops and plants are being grown by farmers. By the way, I just want to thank you for an excellent, amazing presentation. It would require more time to talk about it. Our farm to fork to 2030, I guess 25% should be under organic farming, if I'm not wrong. And don't be hair splitting, but there is a slight difference in the understanding or perception of organic farming. There is a difference between organic farming and organic foodstuffs. There is a major disproportion when you take different EU countries. What are the goals of the US in organic farming and organic foodstuffs? Is it 25% or 0% of organic products and organic area under organic farming? Would you please take the floor, Madam Sabina?
Question. Unfortunately, I don't have at my fingertips the exact percent share of U.S. Agricultural production that is organic. But what I can say is that, and I think this is one of the great things about our system, is that we really welcome farmers of all kinds and support organic production, but not to the exclusion of conventional production, because I think we value the ability of farmers to produce foods, as I said, in a farmer-led, market-oriented way. And there is definitely an interest in organic production, and there is growing demand for organic production. But we also have and recognize the need for food affordability. And that price gap between organic and conventional production, unfortunately, still hasn't been equalized. And so what we try to do is promote the choice, consumers' choice, as well as the choice of farmers in terms of what kinds of agricultural systems they choose to adopt. But don't discourage one in favor of the other. I think we recognize the need and importance for both.
Thank you for your answer. Dámy a pánové, někdo další? Ještě dotaz?
Ladies and gentlemen, any other question? Would you please wait for the mic again? Yeah.
The Czech Feed Industry and also European Feed Industry Association here. Soybean, it's an inevitable source of protein for European feed industry. And in Europe sometimes we have a very specific requirements, and specifically in the last period there is a much stronger voice for the origin of soybean for the non-deforested areas. Maybe it's not your particular cup of tea, but do you think that because this intention should be introduced shortly also in the European legislation. We do expect certain regulations sooner or later, and do expect that it may affect the flows of soybean over the world. And if yes, if it supports the American export to Europe, because definitely American soybean doesn't origin from deforested areas, do expect some, let's say, better harmonization between European and American legislation, and also better coordination between USDA and EFSA in terms of approval of new crops, maybe new GM crops, or because we know in Europe that we are always delayed, and sometimes it brings some problems to our industry, especially in terms of contamination of crops which has not been registered in Europe yet. Thank you.
Your reaction?
Okay, so I am not so well versed and intimately familiar with all the genome kind of modifications and the EU regulations. I really do focus a lot more on the pesticide side of things within my work, but so I can't comment specifically on what the U.S. would do in terms of EU regulation and efforts to harmonize. But I know that we do encourage really like the adoption of lots of different varieties of crops, and that our soybean production is large, and we do tend to export a lot of soybeans to the EU. I think we produce more soybeans on less land than we have in the past, and so with the soybean industry is very cognizant of that. So sorry, I can't comment on it too much more specifically, as it's not my area of expertise. Sorry.
Thank you anyway.
Děkujeme za odpověď, nebo za reakci spíš. Dámy a pánové,
Thanks for the response. Well, any more questions or suggestions? You utilize the opportunity to raise hands, I can see.
It's on.
Okay, thanks a lot. Petra Jorasch from Euroseeds. I wanted to pose a question to Ursula on the detection methods. You mentioned that currently we are not able to properly identify those products, and we might run into trouble specifically in view of the identification issue. I was wondering that even if technology would develop and you would have new tools at hand to do these analysis, we still face the situation that we have different regulatory regimes around the world, specifically if you also look at the US, where certain products are not regulated as GMOs but as conventional, but also in South America. So even if we would have new technologies at hand, do you think there would be still challenges, specifically in view of the different regulatory approaches, and how do you look at the future?
Thanks for a question. That's for Ursula Vincent. I think it's on, maybe? No.
I don't think so.
Right now it is. Yes.
Yeah, no, yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. So first, just to tell you, I'm not from DG Santé, but from DG GRC. So I'm going to try to give you an answer mostly on this side. As I showed, basically the authorization system, let's say the GMOs that we have in Europe are GMOs that are authorized, and this exists. We have authorized GMOs in Europe, and to authorize them we need the validated methods. So if we would have a validated method and the CRM, etc., I don't think there would be a major objection to authorize the new NGTs, even under the current GMO legislation. Basically, this is the point. If you have the ingredients, then it could be authorized, provided that EFSA says that it is safe, etc. You know the framework. Eh? So, from the analytical point of view, this is the major hurdle. What I said is that basically it is not possible to distinguish, for the moment at least, between a product that is originating from an NGT compared to a product where the mutation may have happened in nature as well. This is where we are at the moment. There are things that are done. There are new, let's say, there are some perspective. I'm not telling that there is no hope. There are new genomic sequencing techniques coming up and so on. So from this point of view, what I want to say, to come back to your question, is that even if the regulatory frameworks are different, if we would have the technology, it would already be a major step forward from this point of view, in my opinion. But again, I'm not from DG Santé, but from an ethical point of view, if we are fulfilling the conditions, which is having a method that can be validated, I don't see a reason why this could not be. But, yeah, at the moment, it's difficult.
You might miss the information that you need to enforce.
This is the point, because if you don't have the method, then you cannot enforce the legislation.
Děkuji. Možná, že ještě jedna moje doplňující otázka na...
One additional question addressed to Madame Vincent. Once in the future we are ready to and capable of detecting the new genomic techniques products, then when do you think could this be, or what time would it still take? How much time will it still take, you guess, to have the legislation of NGTs?
Answer you. This is where I cannot give you an answer, because basically it's very difficult to predict. The political science is never the same than the scientific. The political time is never the same than the scientific time, the development and so on. Now, the thing is, this is a bit what I was telling before, not working in isolation and having a look, and this is the reason why we had a look on what was done. There are a lot of innovative techniques, not to produce only the NGTs, but also in the frame of the detection and so on, that are currently done. The major part will be to validate afterwards. But let's say that I don't want to tell you 1, 2, 3, or 10 years, because this would have no, let's say, scientific anchor to do this. But what I want to say is that we have seen many more times in the past that when there is a need, scientists are quite creative and fast as well.
Děkuji. Thank you very much. Možná tatáž otázka zůstává i pro...
The same question I'd like to pose to Mr. Dolezal. Do you think, from the scientific point of view, could you estimate, let's say, the time needed for us to be able to detect NGT products? How much time do you think will it take?
Give a specific answer. I am asking even myself if this is ever possible to do, because these are spontaneous mutations. How we will discriminate a spontaneous mutation from induced mutation? You know, I can imagine that in certain cases when we use editing to insert a longer stretch of DNA, we can do that, and it's not a transformation. It's just using the repair system. Probably we may argue that this piece of DNA was inserted, but this is still a hypothesis, and somebody mentioned the court, like going to court to decide it. And this is, I hope we will never end there, this will be the very bad end of this technology. So in principle, I'm skeptical about the ability to identify. I understand that we can confirm if somebody will claim that this cultivar was developed using this technology and the trick is to induce this mutation, we will be able to identify it by sequencing. This is straightforward. But I mean, if you suspect something to be edited and you don't have a proof, I'm very skeptical about the chance to prove it. This is a legal issue. This is not a scientific issue.
Thank you for your answer and reaction of Mrs. Vincent.
I completely agree with you. This is why I said it is impossible to distinguish both, and in particular, the shorter the sequencing. But then, if I want to refer to, let's say, the intervention from Dr. Afonso Foversa, after it's a matter of concept, because basically, what is the thing behind? Is the safety. So, should we estimate the safety, and now I'm out of my role of GRC, should we estimate the safety because of the technique used or on the product that is produced? I think this will be the whole question in future, and this is what Dr. Afonso was explaining, that basically they are having a look on the globality of the product itself. But it's a concept.
If I can respond, to make our discussion more lively. What about spontaneous mutations? I mean, with the wheat genome with 16 gigabytes pairs, how many mutations appear spontaneously, and we are not aware of them? We don't know, and nobody is testing the safety of this. I mean, the impact, because even each of us differs by at least 20 mutations. Each of us is different. These are spontaneous mutations. This is a natural mechanism. So I think we are reaching like the edge of where we can go, and where we cannot continue, because this is simply not tractable.
Yes, thank you. We understand. Maybe my next question leads to Mr. Olivier de Matos. Co budou muset zemědělci obětovat při přechodu na udržitelnou produkci?
The farmers have to actually sacrifice in the transition to sustainable production that might require the plant protection products reduction.
Please, can you repeat
Můžete
again for Mr. Matos?
She has to repeat it. She has to repeat it, and then we can repeat it, of course. Can you repeat it? Well, can you repeat it? Jesus. You repeat it. She has to repeat, and then we will as well, of course. So what will it be that the farmers will have to sacrifice towards the transition to sustainable production? Can it require, let us say, the reduction or limiting the use of plant protection products, pesticides, etc.?
Thank you for your understanding.
Well, I think, that farmers are already sacrificing a lot to be able to produce. There's a question here is about sort of the transition and giving them the tools that they need to do the transition. So I wouldn't talk about sacrificing. I would talk about transition and giving them the tools to be able to do the transition to a resilient and sustainable agriculture. It can't be that we remove options or solutions from them and don't give them access to other options. So it has to be looked at from a toolbox perspective, availability of several solutions. That's why, with CropLife, we are looking actually at this toolbox and making sure that the toolbox is as complete as possible to help farmers doing their job.
Yeah.
That's what matters at the end of the day. So, and if they tell us that what they have at the moment makes their life difficult or actually leads them to sacrifice, then we need to listen to them and make sure that they have access to the innovation, that they are in a position to use the tools and as quickly as possible so that they can do the transition smoothly. Because at the end of the day, they are producing the food that we have on our table. So we cannot compromise on that.
Sure, understand. Thank you. A ještě poprosíme mikrofon k pánovi tamhle vzadu.
Well, some other questions?
My name is Torkovot. I'm chairman of the Working Party in Zeeten, Koperkosege in Brussels. I'm actually a farmer. It is these people you are talking about. I'm a little bit disappointed that no farmers are represented in the discussion today. Because, as the professor said in a very good presentation, we need to produce more with less. And with this discussion about the technology, we can't detect about we have used one or the other technology. As a farmer, we look for the best variety always. We never look at the tools they used. And these tools are this discussion, ongoing discussion now for 30 years. first 25 years of GMO. We go on in the NGT discussion, and it is very complicated. The farmers, they don't care. They only want better varieties because they have the demand from the society. We have to produce more with less, and it needs to be sustainable. But how can we come out of this discussion? Can we find a solution where it is easy to find, where the plant breeding has been done in a natural way? It doesn't matter which tool we have used, just that we use it is plant tested as we know it is today compared to European legislation. There are no patents in it because we listened this morning that the farmers, nobody wants patents in plants, and it is true. If you ask the farmers, not only organic farmers, but 99% of farmers in Europe doesn't want any patents in plants. So it is very difficult. If somebody is invented in the plant, it is a GMO because then it is man-made. But if it's only a mutation, then we have heard the professor that all the DNA comes from the nature. Then it is only a discovery, and then it can't be patented. So it is very simple. Couldn't it be very simple? This is a question to the Commission. If there's no patent in a plant, then it is not a GMO. Then it is following the normal legislation of Europe. But if there's a patent in it, then it must be a GMO because then it is man-made. Then it does not belong to nature. Then it is the GMO legislation. Couldn't we come on with that? Then the farmers will buy the seed. Thank you.
Thanks for your opinion. It wasn't a question.
Děkuji, nebyla to úplně otázka. It was not a question. Na koho?
Mrs. Vincent.
Yes, I hear you, but I have to disagree. From the moment that you have a human intervention, as a definition, patent or not patent, it is a modification of the genome, which is the definition of a GMO. Now, after the whole question, I don't think it is there. Like we said before, yeah, it may happen in nature, and the key word is may. Now, but it may or may not when you say it may happen in nature. After it's a whole concept, but it is what I was telling before. If I'm talking only from the point of view of the detection, the only thing that I can say is that at the day of today, we cannot distinguish. Now, I didn't say that we have to or not. This is not in my remit. And as you said, and I do think that there are discussions going on at the moment. You heard this morning there is, let's say, a new policy initiative going on, and that is planned for the beginning of 2023, which is actually based on an impact assessment involving many stakeholders, including, I think, when I say all stakeholders, you have also the public perception. I know from my colleagues in the Commission that basically you have also a lot of public people that have been interviewed. Because, I mean, you're right, the GMO was the same, it is 30 years debate, etc. But it is not based on nothing. It is also going on the perception of the public. I suppose that if the perception of the public evolves, then the legislation evolves as well. We can only do and see what we can provide as analytical tools. Are there the right tools to decide on the whole topic, in particular in such a complex matter than the sustainable food system? I don't believe so, and I don't pretend to do so.
Thanks a lot for your answer. I understand you disagree. By the way, some of farmers will be our guest tomorrow at the new day of international conference. Dámy a pánové, myslím, že časový harmonogram.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think that the time schedule shows clearly that we haven't got time for more discussions right now. It was a very short discussion. I'd like to thank our guests for their inputs and for their answers to your questions. They stay with us for all your potential questions. And now I would like to invite you for a very quick cup of coffee, and at the same time You may contact our guests during the break and continue in your debate. We should resume in 15 minutes approximately, or probably maximum 20 minutes.
Tak, dámy a pánové.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention, and I thank our speakers for being with us. Thank you very much.